She lost her baby. Then found someone else's airports are full of goodbyes. But Gate 42 became something else entirely. The woman was well-dressed, calm. She smiled when Ethan asked about the baby strapped to her chest, said his name was Micah, said he was just sleepy. Too sleepy. Officer Ethan Mercer had seen sleep-deprived babies before, but this one didn't move, didn't twitch, didn't even breathe like babies do with those tiny belly rises. And Ranger, his canine partner, usually friendly to kids, was different. He stood between the stroller and the woman like a sentinel, silent, unblinking. The woman flinched. It started with a welfare check. It ended with the unraveling of a carefully designed lie. This isn't just a story about a baby in danger. It's about the invisible grief no one talks about, the kind that breaks mothers and creates monsters. And the dog who sensed it all. The wind howled outside Hartwell International like a living thing, clawing at windows, rattling signage, sending bursts of icy snow skittering across the floor every time the sliding doors gasped open. Inside Terminal C, stranded passengers clustered like seaweed in tide pools, marooned by the blizzard that had shut down most of the East Coast. The storm had come early, uninvited, and it wasn't leaving any time soon. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, departure boards blinked with endless cancellations. Babies cried, phones died, and the smell of burnt espresso and frayed patients lingered thick in the air. Officer Ethan Cole walked the main concourse with quiet precision, his boots echoing faintly against the scuffed tiles. At his side, Ranger padded steadily, head high, ears alert, every step disciplined yet fluid. The German shepherd's presence drew the eye, not because of his imposing frame or deep black saddle fur, but because of the unspoken weight he carried. The vest across his chest read, K9 Behavioral Unit, do not distract. But people always stared anyway. Ethan let his hand brush briefly across Ranger's shoulder as they passed Gate 32, where a group of college students huddled in a circle, laughter bubbling through their shared misery. A rare sound tonight. Most travelers wore the same blank, sagging expression, the exhaustion of limbo. Ranger's eyes scanned the crowd, his body language relaxed but constantly reading the room. Posture, pace, eye movement, temperature shifts. He wasn't trained to sniff out drugs or bombs. Ranger specialized in something harder to quantify human intent. Micro-expressions, shifts in stress patterns, the cues people didn't even know they were giving. Ethan adjusted his coat collar, still warm from the security lounge's stale coffee machine. Third sweep, he murmured, mostly for himself. Ranger's ear twitched in response. It had been 7 months since their last field deployment. The Reynolds Park case, the one Ethan didn't talk about anymore. A domestic dispute gone wrong, a child hidden, a ticking clock. Ranger had found the girl, but too late. Ethan had carried her out in his arms, her breath already gone. That night broke something in both of them. Ranger hadn't eaten for 3 days after. The department had wanted to retire him. Ethan had refused. Instead, they transferred both of them to Hartwell, a quieter post, lower stakes. A place where neither man nor dog would have to look too closely into darkness for a while. Or so they thought. Outside the towering windows near Gate 29, the snow was coming down sideways now, thick and fast, like nature trying to erase the world 1 inch at a time. Plows roared on the tarmac, carving futile paths through the white. Ethan paused near a kiosk filled with overpriced headphones and empty granola bar racks. A child nearby was sobbing into his mother's lap. Ranger's eyes lingered on them for a moment, not with threat, but something gentler, something remembered. Ethan glanced down, noting the barely perceptible way Ranger leaned ever so slightly left a signal. He was reading elevated emotional stress. Ethan followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. The mother stroked her son's hair, no sign of distress beyond the storm fatigue everyone wore. "You're just tired," Ethan said softly. But Ranger didn't move. His body was still not stiff, not alarmed, but listening. Ethan watched the slow breath through his flanks, the barely open mouth. This was the posture Ranger assumed when memory crept too close to present. It had happened before, on their second week at Hartwell. A child had dropped a teddy bear that looked too much like the one from Reynolds. Ranger had frozen. His tail had tucked halfway, and for the first time in his service life he had whimpered. It was brief, but Ethan had heard it, a sound like something cracking quietly inside. Now, tonight, that same weight seemed to return, though there was no visible trigger. Just snow, just noise, just silence underneath it all. "You good, bud?" Ethan asked under his breath. Ranger blinked, turned, continued walking. They passed Gate 36, where a teenage girl sat alone, scrolling through photos on a cracked iPhone. Her mascara had run, and her nails were bitten raw. Ranger slowed briefly, sniffed the air, then kept going, monitoring, watching, weighing. "Cole!" a voice called through Ethan's comm. He tapped his earpiece. "Go ahead." "You're clear on Concourse D. Continue sweep through International." "Copy. On our way." As he turned down the hallway toward international arrivals, the crowd thinned. The tension didn't. This wing of the airport had always felt colderless foot traffic, more steel and glass. Ranger's gait shifted slightly. His ears rose a fraction higher. Ethan adjusted his pace to match. A familiar readiness was settling in his chest. Not fear, not even adrenaline, just that quiet readiness he'd learned long ago in combat zones, when the air changed before the danger did. He didn't know it yet, but in less than 5 minutes, Ranger would do something that hadn't happened since that horrible autumn in Reynolds Park. He would break protocol. He would bark loud and hard and unrelenting, and everything would change. But for now, they walked man and dog into the long shadow of something unseen, and the storm kept howling. They turned the corner into the international arrivals corridor sterile, echoing, filled with rolling suitcases and the quiet tension of people in transit. Overhead, a soft announcement crackled through the speakers, something about a gate change. Most ignored it. Their attention was on their phones, boarding passes, or blinking flight boards that hadn't offered good news in hours. Ranger slowed, not by much, barely half a stride. But Ethan felt it instantly, like the subtle shift in wind before a storm breaks. His hand, already resting on the leather lead, tightened fractionally. Ranger's ears were forward, posture upright, not the posture of curiosity but of calculation, of decision. They were approaching Gate D14 when the change became unmistakable. Ranger halted, completely. His front paws planted wide, chest lifted, nostrils flaring once. His body angled slightly right, toward the small seating area adjacent to the gate. Ethan followed his gaze and saw her. A woman late 30s, early 40s, sat alone in a pristine cream coat cinched at the waist, black heels crossed neatly at the ankle. Not a hair out of place. She looked like she'd stepped out of a travel magazine, elegant, composed, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Her lips, painted with muted rose, curved into a neutral smile as she gently rocked an infant wrapped tightly in a powder blue blanket. At first glance, nothing looked unusual, until Ethan noticed the baby's stillness. No twitch, no stir, no hand creeping out from the folds of fabric. Not even a reflexive flinch from the endless overhead noise. The child wasn't sleeping. It was motionless. Ranger's throat vibrated, a low growl, steady and deep, so deep it felt more felt than heard. The kind of growl that came from the core of a creature who knew something was wrong before anyone else did. "Ranger," Ethan said under his breath. "Easy." The growl didn't stop. It intensified. The woman finally noticed them. Her lips froze, smile faltering slightly as she adjusted the baby in her arms, not protectively, more cautiously, as if preparing. Ranger took a step forward. The growl broke, and the bark came, not a sharp snap of sound. This was full voice commanding, echoing, reverberating through glass and metal like a siren of its own. One bark, then another, then 5 in quick succession, like warning shots no one could ignore. The terminal shifted instantly. Heads turned. Phones came out. Travelers stopped mid-step, drawn by the primal volume of the sound. "Sir, control your dog!" someone barked from behind. A security agent. Ethan tried his hand signaling, his voice firm. "Ranger, heel!" But the dog didn't break. He remained in that braced position, body taut like a coiled spring, eyes locked on the woman and the child. He didn't lunge. He didn't move closer. He simply barked, again and again, like the truth was trapped in his throat, and this was the only way he knew to scream. The woman stood up slowly. Her movements were graceful, too graceful. One hand cradled the baby, the other reached for her carry-on bag. "It's okay," she said, her voice carefully modulated, like someone used to holding courtrooms or fundraisers. "He must be reacting to the baby's scent. You know how dogs are." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am," Ethan said, stepping in, positioning himself between her and the exit. "What flight are you on?" Chicago, connecting to Denver," she replied smoothly, rocking the baby again. The child didn't move, not once. Ranger barked again, louder than before. Passengers nearby winced at the sound. A few began whispering, others filmed. The woman adjusted the blanket, shielding the child's face. "I'm sorry, officer," she said, turning toward the hallway. "We've already been delayed. I really need to get to the gate." But Ranger moved with her, perfectly in sync, a half step to the right, intercepting her path with uncanny precision. Another bark closer now. The kind of sound that doesn't ask for attention. It demands it. Ethan held up a hand toward the growing crowd. "Please stay back. Let us handle this." The woman's breath caught for a split second, barely noticeable, except to someone trained to watch the space between the words. That was when Ethan noticed it. Her wedding ring. Beautiful. Platinum. But wrong. No sun mark on her finger. No indented skin. No natural wear on the metal. It looked like a prop worn for effect, not out of habit. "You said Chicago," Ethan said again, keeping his voice level. "What airline?" She hesitated. "American." Ethan didn't blink. "All American flights to Chicago were canceled 2 hours ago." Her face stiffened. "I meant United," she said too quickly. "It's been a long day." Ranger had stopped barking, but he hadn't relaxed. His eyes, sharp and amber, remained fixed on the child in her arms, not out of curiosity, out of duty. "Ma'am," Ethan said softly, "can I see your boarding pass and ID, please?" The woman clutched the baby tighter. "That won't be necessary." It's standard procedure, he replied, matching her calm, especially when traveling with minors. She took a half step back, and Ranger moved with her. Silent now, focused. A sentinel. "Ma'am," Ethan said again, more firmly this time, "I'm going to have to insist." For a moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached into her purse. Her hand trembled, just a little, not from cold, from something else. Ethan took a slow breath. He'd seen nerves before, seen people squirm under questions, stammer through fake stories, sweat through button-downs in over-air-conditioned terminals. But this wasn't that. This wasn't nerves. This was a performance, and it was slipping. The woman's hand moved inside her purse with too much precision for someone claiming to be flustered. Her grip adjusted on the baby, not soothing, not nurturing, securing, like someone carrying something fragile, yes, but not necessarily alive. Ethan took a small step forward, voice low, calm. "Ma'am, you said your name is Madeline Shaw, correct?" She nodded once, not meeting his eyes. "And this is your child?" "Yes," she said, breath hitching slightly. "My daughter." "What's her name?" There was the pause. Tiny. Fractional. But in moments like this, Ethan didn't need long. "Emma," she answered. "Emma Rose." Behind him, Ranger stood statue still, tail low, gaze fixed on the baby with an intensity that Ethan had only seen once before on that terrible winter night 3 years ago, when Ranger had refused to leave a dead infant's side for 36 hours. The crowd around them had mostly dispersed or stayed back, unsure whether to film or flee. 2 TSA agents lingered near the terminal's far end, waiting to be called in. But Ethan hadn't made that call yet. He needed to see something first. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the blanket. The woman tightened her grip. "She's asleep." "I can see that," Ethan said gently, "but I just need to confirm she's okay. Dogs don't bark like that for no reason." "She's a deep sleeper," the woman snapped, her composure cracking for just a breath before smoothing out again. "She had a long flight, jet lag." "Where are you flying from?" "Paris." "What airline?" She blinked. "Delta." Ethan waited. "There's no direct Delta flight from Paris to Hartwell," he said, keeping his voice even. "At least not today. The storm rerouted all transatlantic traffic to Houston or Atlanta." Her lips parted slightly, then closed. Her grip on the infant shifted again, not protectively, but possessively. Ethan felt it in his chest first, then deep in his gut, the kind of cold that didn't come from the snow outside, a creeping certainty that something here was terribly off. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to the baby's level. She was bundled tightly, too tightly. Her head leaned against the crook of the woman's arm, body slack. No twitch, no tiny fingers curling toward warmth, no reflexive movement at all, not even from Ranger's barking just moments earlier. Ethan had children of his own. He knew what an infant should do in a crowd that loud. This baby hadn't so much as flinched. "Emma," he said softly. Nothing. No flutter of eyelids, no shifting breath. "She's okay," the woman said quickly. "She just sleeps like this sometimes, always has." "You said she's 8 months? Almost 9? Does she have a passport with her?" The woman hesitated. "It's in my luggage." "Which is where?" "Checked." "All of it?" She nodded. Ethan stood slowly, letting the silence settle between them. He studied her face, pristine makeup, flawless skin, not a bead of sweat. But under the surface, He saw it now. The way her eye twitched every time he said the baby's name, the way she adjusted her stance, subtly inching backward, one heel angling toward the exit corridor. Ranger hadn't made a sound since the last bark, but his body had shifted again now slightly in front of Ethan, eyes not just watching, but guarding. He knew. Ethan felt it deep in his chest. That tension between the things we know and the things we can't prove. Yet. "Ma'am," he said, his tone softening deliberately, "I want to believe you. But I need to follow up. It's procedure." "There's no need," she began, but this time her voice cracked, just a little. She pulled the baby higher into her arms, adjusting the scarf around the child's head like a curtain, shielding more than warmth. "Step aside, officer." Her voice changed, not pleading, not rehearsed, but cold, direct, a different tone entirely. She wasn't trying to fool him anymore. She was preparing to run. Ethan didn't reach for his radio, not yet. Instead, he did something more instinctive. He took a half-step back, not threatening. Open, measured, and in that space between them, Ranger moved again, silently, smoothly, standing directly in her path. No growl this time, just presence. And that's what broke her. "I need to go," she said again. "You have no right to detain me." "I'm not detaining you, ma'am," Ethan replied. "I'm asking questions, which I'm required to do if I suspect a child may be in danger." "You're mistaken. Then let's clear it up. Together." She shook her head. Her knuckles whitened against the blanket. Her mouth opened, but whatever came next never left her lips. Because right then, the baby's head shifted slightly. Just a tremble of fabric, and a single limp arm slid free from the wrap. Ethan's heart stopped. There were tiny bruises on the wrist, faint, but unmistakable. Purple shadows against pale skin. The arm dangled lifelessly. Ranger took a slow step forward, his breathing quiet, his posture unchanged. Ethan no longer saw a traveler in distress. He saw a child who hadn't moved in minutes, wrapped too tightly, cradled by someone who was beginning to come undone. "I need paramedics," Ethan said into his calm, his voice low but firm. "Now." The woman flinched, and in her eyes something changed. Panic. She turned, and Ranger was there. Not lunging, not biting, just stepping in front of her, cutting her off without violence, but with a clarity that needed no translation. Ethan's voice rose only slightly. "Ma'am, stay where you are." The crowd was quiet now. Even the storm outside seemed to hush. The baby still hadn't moved, and the woman wasn't running anymore, because whatever this was, it had just turned into something far more than suspicion. The medical team arrived with a quiet urgency that only those trained for crisis, carry-measured, efficient emotion held at bay. But even they paused when they saw Ranger standing guard, his amber eyes locked on the woman cradling the unmoving child. The woman who had given the name Madeline Shaw stood unnaturally still, back pressed against the wall near the emergency corridor. The baby remained nestled in the crook of her arm, limbs too quiet, skin too pale under the terminal lights. One of the paramedics, a woman in her 40s with crow's feet and calm hands, made a motion to take the child. Ranger growled not at her, but at the woman holding the baby. The message was clear. Don't trust her. Ethan gently raised a hand. "Give us a minute. I need to ask a few questions before we move forward." The paramedic hesitated, then nodded. Ranger eased only slightly. Ethan turned to the woman. Her eyes flicked toward the corridor exit, again measuring distance, perhaps even risk. "Can you confirm your full name, ma'am?" he asked, keeping his voice measured. "Madeline Shaw," she replied quickly. Too quickly. Her voice had that crisp, practiced sharpness of someone who'd rehearsed her answer just enough to believe it herself. "Date of birth?" "January 6th, 1986. Ethan made a note on his tablet, though it was mostly for show. He already suspected the ID was fake or borrowed at best. Her license had been too pristine, no fading or fingerprint wear, the kind you find on a fresh print, not a wallet veteran. "Where are you traveling from?" "Frankfurt, through New York." "That's different from what you told me before," he said mildly. "You mentioned Paris." Her lips parted. "Right. Yes. We were in Paris last week, visiting my husband's family, then connected through Frankfurt and JFK. That's a lot of flights for an infant. She's used to it." Ethan nodded, letting the silence stretch. She shifted slightly, adjusting the baby's blanket again. Ranger let out a single bark-sharp echoing, directed precisely at the moment her fingers made contact with the infant's shoulder. The woman jumped, nearly dropping the blanket. "Control your dog," she snapped, voice spiking. But beneath the sharpness, something frayed. Ethan didn't respond right away. Instead, he crouched next to Ranger and whispered, "Good boy." Then he stood again, stepping close enough to see the slight tremor in her hand, the sweat gathering along her hairline despite the air conditioning. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked softly. She blinked. "Emma." "Middle name?" She paused. A heartbeat. 2. "Rose," she said. "Emma Rose." It was the kind of pause people don't take when talking about their own child. Ethan tilted his head. "How old is Emma?" 8 months, she said quickly, then added, "Well, almost 9 now." That last part was meant to sound natural. It didn't. Ranger's ears twitched. He took 2 slow paces to the left, circling gently toward the woman's flank. Not in aggression in assessment. He was reading her body tension, her breath rate, her spatial awareness. Ethan had seen it before. Ranger didn't bark unless the pattern didn't match the claim. "Mind if I confirm your flight information?" Ethan asked, tapping his tablet again. "Just protocol, considering what we've got going on here." Her jaw clenched. "We've already been delayed for hours, officer." "I understand. But when a child appears unresponsive and a trained service dog reacts this way, we're required to log and confirm all passenger data." She hesitated, then offered, "Flight 762 United to Chicago, connecting to Denver." He typed slowly, deliberately. "That's strange," he said after a moment. "Flight 762 was canceled 2 hours ago due to weather. I watched the announcement myself." The woman's face drained a shade. "I must have gotten the number wrong," she muttered. Ethan didn't reply. He let her unravel. "I meant another one, maybe 714. I'm not sure. This day has been insane. I haven't slept. Emma hasn't slept. You said she was a good sleeper." The words landed like a hammer wrapped in velvet. The woman blinked at him. Her jaw opened slightly, then closed. And Ranger barked again. Once, sharp, final. The baby didn't move. Not a twitch, not a flinch, not a cry from the piercing noise. Ethan stepped in now, voice still calm, but backed by steel. "Ma'am, I need to see identification for both of you. Birth certificate. Passport, whatever you have." "I told you, it's in my luggage." "You checked all of it?" She nodded, too fast. "The airline told you that was okay?" "They said she was too young to need—" "That's not true," Ethan said. "Every child under 2 still requires identification, especially for international travel. So if you don't have it—" She took a step back. Ranger mirrored her, blocking her path like a shadow. Ethan didn't flinch. "Who is she?" he asked gently. "Really? She's my daughter." "Then help me keep her safe. If she's sedated, she needs medical care right now." "I didn't—" "You didn't what?" Ethan asked. "Didn't know she was sedated? Didn't mean to? Or didn't care?" For the first time her voice wavered. I didn't hurt her. I'm taking her where she'll be loved, where she belongs." "Is that where you belong too?" Ethan asked quietly. Something in her cracked, not shattered, just cracked. Ranger didn't bark this time. He lay down slowly, right between her and the exit, as if to say, "You've come far enough." She stood frozen, just beyond the halo of Ranger's presence. Her fingers tightened around the blanket, knuckles blanching, lips pressed so tightly they lost all color. Ethan didn't move. He didn't need to. The distance between them was psychological now, not spatial. Every inch of her carefully curated appearance was coming undone, but only to those who knew where to look. And Ethan had learned the hard way where to look. He let his eyes roam over her again, not intrusively, but deliberately. Not the face, not the voice, not the clothes, the gaps. The ring on her finger glinted beneath the fluorescent lights. Platinum, thin band, elegant, but her skin beneath it? Smooth. No indentation, no mark from years of wear, like it had been put on this morning. A prop, not a memory. His eyes dropped to her carry-on. A designer model sleek leather, brand new. No airport scuffing, no water stains, no stickers, no personality. Just showroom quality. Like it hadn't been dragged across 3 countries and 2 terminals with a baby. And the coat cream wool, pristine. Still crisp at the elbows. Mothers don't travel like that. Not with children. Not in a storm. Ranger circled once, slow and precise, then lay down again, directly between her and the corridor exit. His breathing was even, but his body hummed with focus. Ethan watched the woman begin to crumble, not dramatically, not all at once, just little pieces, a flutter of her eye, the way she licked her lips too often, the way her gaze never quite returned to the child's face. "Do you want to sit down?" Ethan offered, voice still low. She shook her head. "I'm fine." But her knees were beginning to bend slightly, her weight shifting from heel to toe like someone deciding whether to collapse or flee. Ethan crouched by Ranger, his fingers brushing through the coarse fur at his neck, and that almost unexpectedly brought him back. 2 years ago. The training compound was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something had gone wrong. They'd given Ranger a second chance against protocol, against better judgment. He was a broken dog, they said, too traumatized, too unpredictable. His last assignment had ended with blood on the walls and a child who didn't survive. But Ethan had seen something in his eyes. Not failure, grief. So he fought for him. And Ranger had responded, not with tail wags, not with tricks, but with a haunting vigilance no one could quite explain, especially not when it came to children. He wasn't a narcotics K9, not an explosives expert, Not even a traditional search and rescue tracker. He was something rarer. They'd run simulations pairing Ranger with volunteers, actors, even kids. And every time the dog would zero in when the adult was pretending, when the affection wasn't real, when the connection was counterfeit. They called it a pattern detection instinct. Ethan called it something else. He knew what a lie felt like, not a spoken one, a maternal one. That day in the compound, Ranger had lunged, not in aggression, but in refusal, when a man posed as a father and tried to drag a girl by the arm during a role play. Ranger's growl was low and precise, and his body stood between them like a question mark demanding an answer. The girl later admitted she felt scared, not by Ranger, by the man. "He looked kind," she'd whispered, "but it wasn't real." Neither was this woman's smile, or her story. Back in the present, Ethan rose again, standing eye level with Madeline Shaw, or whoever she truly was. Her face had gone pale now, like a mask too long held aloft, finally trembling in the wind. "You're very calm for someone whose child might be in danger," he said softly. Her chin jerked up, sharp. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You haven't tried to check her pulse, haven't spoken to her. Not once since we started talking." "She's asleep." "No, she's not," Ethan replied, voice still level. "She hasn't moved in nearly 20 minutes. I've seen dolls that flinch more when someone barks." The woman flinched at that. Ranger's ears twitched. "She's just tired," she insisted again. "You said that already." "I didn't do anything to her." Ethan tilted his head. "But someone did, didn't they?" The silence between them wasn't empty. It was loaded with fear, memory, motive, and something else. Grief. That was when Ethan saw it, not in her face, but in her hands. The way they cradled the baby. Not tight, not aggressive, desperate, possessive. As if she was holding on not just to a child, but to something slipping faster than she could grasp. Something like reality. Ethan softened. "Tell me the truth," he said gently. "Not because you owe me, but because if she's still alive, she needs help. Now." The woman blinked hard, and for a moment, just one something real surfaced behind her eyes. Not the mask, not the posture, but pain. Then it vanished, and she looked away. "I want my lawyer," she whispered. Ethan sighed and turned to the paramedics. "Let's get the baby checked. Now." As they moved in, Ranger stood, positioning himself between the woman and the infant again, not aggressive, not threatening, just resolute, the way only survivors know how to be. Ethan turned from the woman and pressed the button on his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Cole at D14. I need immediate medical assistance. Infant welfare check unresponsive. Suspected sedation." A pause, then static. "Copy that, Officer Cole. Medics en route. ETA 3 minutes. He turned back. The woman hadn't moved, but her eyes had. They darted past him, past Ranger, to the corridor beyond the staff doors, the emergency exit, the gap in the chaos. That was when Ethan knew. She was going to run. "Ma'am," he said, lifting a hand gently. "Don't." But she was already shifting weight to her back foot. Her grip on the baby tightened. Her purse strap adjusted higher. "I don't think you understand what's happening," she said, voice low, controlled. "You're making a mistake. I need to get to my gate. My husband is waiting." Ranger took one step forward, silent, steady, not barking, just present. The woman's breath caught. Then she bolted. She didn't run like a panicked parent. She ran like someone trained to disappear. Sharp turn, low stride, diagonal angle toward the exit. She didn't scream, didn't look back. But she hadn't counted on the dog. Ranger moved before Ethan could shout, cutting her off mid-sprint, blocking the corridor with a wall of muscle and resolve. No growl, no lunge. He simply planted himself in front of her like a gate that wouldn't open. The woman skidded to a halt, breath catching. "Move!" she barked, panicked now. Ranger didn't blink. Ethan approached fast, his voice sharp this time. "Don't touch him!" She froze, one hand still gripping the baby, the other hovering mid-air as if considering a push, a slap, anything to keep going. But she didn't, because Ranger didn't look like a dog anymore. He looked like a consequence. "I warned you," Ethan said, breath controlled. "That child is not okay." "She's mine," the woman gasped. "You have no right." "You're right," he cut in. "I don't have the right to accuse you, but I do have the obligation to protect a child in danger. And whatever this isn't motherhood. This is something else." Behind them, the double doors burst open. Paramedics arrived, 3 of them, wheeling a small kit, their faces already steeled. One woman, short and stocky with calm hands. One younger man. One gray-haired medic who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. "Infant sedation suspected," Ethan briefed quickly. "No movement, no responsiveness for over 20 minutes. Unknown substances." "Hand her over," the lead medic said firmly. The woman hesitated, just for a second. Then she pulled the baby close again, eyes wild. "You'll scare her," she said. "She doesn't like strangers." "She's not responding to anything," Ethan said. "Not my voice, not barking, not even gravity. This isn't fear. This is chemistry." The medics moved in, slow and calm. Ranger didn't growl, but his body shifted again, tense and protective now. This time not toward Ethan, but toward the baby. It was subtle, but Ethan saw it. Ranger wasn't alerting to the woman anymore. He was guarding the child. That changed everything. "Ma'am, put the child down," the older medic ordered. "Now!" The woman's eyes welled up, shockingly fast. "She's all I have," she whispered. Then her knees buckled. Whether it was from exhaustion, surrender, or something deeper, Ethan didn't know. But she sank to the ground slowly, cradling the baby one last time, before letting the paramedics take her. As the baby was gently laid out on a thermal mat, the truth unfolded in silence. Pale skin, shallow breathing, eyes unmoving beneath closed lids, no cuts, no bruising, but something off, unnatural. The lead medic pulled out a light and checked the baby's pupils, then placed a hand gently on the child's chest. "Respiratory depression," she murmured. "Pupils sluggish. She's been dosed." "With what?" Ethan asked. "Could be diphenhydramine, could be something stronger. Hard to say without labs, but this wasn't accidental." Ethan nodded, stepping back as the medics began their protocol. IV lines, oxygen, gentle suction, every motion precise. The woman Madeline Shaw sat in silence now, hands limp in her lap, watching them work, not weeping, not protesting, just staring. "Is she going to be okay?" she whispered. Ethan knelt beside her. "I don't know, but she has a chance now." The woman looked down, blinking slow. "She never cried," she said. "Not once. Even when I gave her the drops. She just looked at me. Like she knew." "What's her real name?" Ethan asked quietly. The woman didn't answer. She just stared at her empty arms. The gurney began to roll. The child, breathing now, but still unmoving, was taken through the staff hallway, one paramedic holding a portable oxygen mask gently over her mouth. Ranger walked beside her, not commanded, not leashed. He simply followed, because he knew. This wasn't about drugs, or deception, or identity. This was about a child who almost disappeared forever. And thanks to him, she didn't. The name came over the radio just past midnight. Isabel Monroe, 37. Recently released from Lakeside Psychiatric Center following a 6-month involuntary hold. Diagnosis: postpartum psychosis following the sudden death of her 3-month-old son. The ID she'd used. Madeline Shaw was real. Just not hers. It belonged to a former neighbor, a woman who'd moved to Vermont 2 years ago and had no idea her identity had been hijacked. Ethan stared at the data on his tablet, the sterile text doing little to numb the sick feeling crawling up his spine. "Confirmed?" he asked. Dispatch replied, "Affirmative. Prints matched. We've contacted Lakeside. She was released 2 weeks ago, said to be stable under outpatient care." He glanced across the observation room, through the thick glass where Isabel, no longer Madeline, sat hunched in a chair, wrapped in a gray county-issued blanket. Her hands were folded in her lap. Eyes down, shoulders curved inward like someone trying to disappear inside her own skin. She didn't look dangerous. She looked hollow, and that terrified him more. Beside him, Ranger lay with his head between his paws, eyes open and alert. The dog hadn't taken his gaze off her since the medical team had stabilized the child, now resting in pediatric ICU under protective watch. Ranger knew. He always did. But even so, this case cut too close. Ethan stepped away from the window, pushing the door open with a sigh. The lights inside the interview room were low, casting soft halos on the institutional gray walls. Isabel didn't look up when he entered. She hadn't said a word since the arrest. He took a seat across from her. No clipboard, no notepad, just presence. Silence stretched between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Do you want to tell me her name?" Still, she said nothing. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "She's stable. The baby. Breathing on her own. But she was sedated. That could have gone very differently." Isabel blinked. Once. Slowly. "Her name is Emma," she said. But there was no conviction in it, no attachment, just a placeholder for something that didn't fit. "You told us that already," Ethan replied. "But I don't think that's the name written on her birth certificate." Isabel looked up. Her eyes were red but dry. And in them, Ethan saw the flicker of someone still lost somewhere between what was true and what she desperately needed to believe. "She's mine," she said softly. "You don't understand. Nobody does." He let the silence hang again. "Tell me about him," he said after a moment. She stiffened. "Who?" "Your son." Her breath caught. Ethan didn't push, just waited. Isabel's shoulders trembled. "His name was Charlie," she whispered. "He died in his sleep. Just didn't wake up. The doctor called it SIDS. Said sometimes it just happens." Her jaw clenched. "But I didn't believe them." "I still don't." A long pause. "When did you stop believing it?" Ethan asked. Her hands gripped the edge of the table now, white-knuckled. "When the dream started. When I saw him again. Not in pictures, in faces, in places, on the street, in parks, once in a grocery store, babies who looked just like him. Her voice cracked. I knew what they'd done. Ethan frowned. Who's they? Isabel blinked slowly like she'd forgotten he was there. The people who take babies from mothers they don't think are good enough. The ones who decide grief makes us unfit, like we're broken because we break. She looked at him then, really looked. Do you know what it's like to hold your child and then not? Ethan didn't answer, because he did, not by blood, but by memory. The girl in Reynolds Park, cold, too late, too small to carry such silence in her arms. Ranger had sat beside her for hours, unmoving, until Ethan finally picked her up, throat raw from screaming at a sky that never answered. That day had changed him. It had changed them both. And now, here they were again. I know Charlie died, Isabel said, quieter now. But sometimes I wake up and I'm still in the moment just before, when he was breathing, when he was mine. And then I open my eyes, and the air feels like glass, and I can't move, and there's this scream stuck in my chest that never gets out. Ethan swallowed hard. That's grief, not truth. But what if it's both? She whispered. She leaned forward now, voice almost childlike. She looked just like him, same lashes, same nose. What if they lied? What if she's really him? She's not, Isabel, Ethan said softly but firmly. She has a family, a mother, and they're looking for her right now. Her face crumpled. For the first time, she began to cry, silent tears, like something cracked open just enough for the pain to leak through. And still, she never asked about what would happen next, because on some level, she already knew. Outside, in the hallway, Ranger rose slowly and walked back to the glass. He stood there, staring at her through the partition. Ethan joined him. She's not evil, he whispered. She's just broken. Ranger didn't move, but his tail gave the smallest flick like the wind shifting through old wounds. It had been a call like any other. Suburban address, welfare check. A neighbor had reported a foul smell coming from the duplex next door. Mail piling up, lights off for days, no movement, no noise. Ethan remembered the door when they found it, slightly ajar, winter wind whistling through a narrow gap, like the house itself was exhaling its last breath. The house was cold, still, too still. Officers moved in with measured steps, weapons holstered but hands hovering near. The living room was untouched, toys in a basket, a stroller near the door, one baby bottle on the counter, half-filled and sour. Ethan was the second through the hallway, and when he turned the corner into the back bedroom, he stopped cold, because the room was filled with the kind of silence that has weight, the kind you feel in your chest before your brain catches up. And in that silence was a German shepherd pup, not more than a year old, lying beside a queen-sized bed. Blood stained the bed sheets. Two bodies, a woman in her 20s. A baby no older than 6 months, curled beside her like they'd fallen asleep together and never woke up. And the dog. The dog who did not move, not when the flashlight beam hit him, not when the officer behind Ethan muttered a curse, not when the camera shutter clicked. He simply lay there, his body pressed against the infant's, muzzle tucked beside the tiny chest. Waiting, watching, guarding. Ethan had approached slowly, hand extended. "Easy, boy," he'd whispered, though the dog hadn't growled, hadn't bared a tooth. He just lifted his head and looked at him, and in those eyes was something Ethan had only seen once before: grief that understood its own permanence. Animal control had to sedate him. He'd snapped only when they tried to pull him from the bed. Not out of aggression, but something more primal, more sacred, as if he believed that if he left that room, he'd be betraying them, his family. That night stayed with Ethan. The cold smell of the house, the mother's arm draped protectively over the baby's legs, the fact that the dog, who had been named Thor, according to the vet records, had refused food, water, or movement for nearly 48 hours. They had to carry him out, and when they did, Ethan remembered his head swinging toward the child one last time. That was the beginning of it. They renamed him Ranger at the station. The shelter had marked him as behavioral risk, unsuitable for adoption due to trauma, attachment disorder, and refusal to respond to commands. They recommended behavioral euthanasia. But Ethan had gone to see him. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way Ranger had looked at him in that bedroom. Or maybe because Ethan, too, knew what it meant to hold on to ghosts. He found Ranger curled in the corner of a steel kennel, unmoving, until a toddler on the far end of the hallway screamed, not in pain, just that high, chaotic sound toddlers make when life gets too big. And Ranger had stood up, fast, alert, not barking, not scared, concerned. He'd pressed his body against the gate of the kennel, eyes focused down the hall. Ethan had seen enough. He filed the paperwork the next day. Training Ranger wasn't easy. He didn't respond to food, or praise, or touch, not at first. He flinched at the sound of a baby crying. He refused to sit if a woman held a child in her arms. But with time, slow, patient, soul-cracking time, he began to rebuild. And something strange emerged. He didn't just read threats, he read bonds. In training simulations, when an actor pretended to be the parent of a child, Ranger could tell, not from aggression, but from posture, breath, touch. When the bond was real, Ranger would relax, even nudge the child playfully. But when the adult was performing, something in him would lock tight, shoulders stiff, ears forward, chest tensed. He wasn't trained to do it. He simply knew, and that instinct had saved lives more than once. Back in the present, Ethan watched Ranger through the glass as Isabel Monroe sat silently in her cell. The dog was still, eyes alert, ears at half attention. And Ethan realized something he hadn't wanted to say out loud. Ranger didn't see Isabel as evil. He saw her as broken. Just like the mother in that bedroom. Just like the baby who never made it out. And that was what made him dangerous to people like her. Not his bite, not his bark, but his ability to see through the performance of love and recognize when it was missing. The fluorescent lights in the interview room buzzed faintly above, casting a pale circle of artificial calm over the steel table between them. Ethan sat across from her again, same posture, same stillness. Ranger waited just outside the glass-paneled door, his shadow unmoving, as if he too was listening. Isabel hadn't looked up since he entered. Her fingers kept tracing the hem of her blanket, slow, repetitive, almost like she was rocking an invisible infant in her lap. Ethan waited a long time before he spoke. "You told the EMTs you didn't act alone." Her head lifted slightly. A pause. Then the faintest nod. "I didn't," she whispered. "Who helped you?" Another pause. Then, "Dr. Vale." The name came out like breath breaking on glass. Ethan didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. "Grayson Vale?" She nodded. Her voice softened, almost reverent now. "He understood me. Really understood me." Ethan leaned forward, arms folded on the table. "He was your therapist?" "Still is," she said. "He visits me twice a week, even after I was discharged. He didn't give up on me like the others did." "And he told you Charlie was alive?" She smiled faintly, fragile, trembling at the corners. "Not at first. He said it gently. He said grief makes our memories unreliable, that sometimes trauma clouds truth." Ethan kept his tone neutral. "So he didn't say it outright?" "No," she said, her eyes distant now. "But he asked questions. He showed me pictures. He said, 'What if the child I buried wasn't really Charlie? What if the system had made a mistake?' It happens," he said. He'd seen it before. Infants switched, medical files sealed, custody reassignments under the guise of protective intervention. Ethan tried to keep his breath steady. "And he told you where to find Emma?" "She's not Emma," Isabel snapped. The edge in her voice came quick, hot, desperate. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "She's Charlie," she whispered, curling into herself again. "She has his ears, the same left dimple. When I saw her picture on that mommy blog, I knew." Ethan's voice was gentle now. "He showed you the photo?" Isabel hesitated, then nodded. "He printed it for me. Said he found it online on a support forum for new mothers. He said we had to act fast. That if we waited, she might vanish. That the people who took Charlie could change her name, erase the rest." "And he helped you get to the airport?" Her fingers stopped moving. "Yes," she whispered. "He paid for the ticket, told me what to say, which name to use. He had it all prepared, even the ID. He said it was temporary, that once we did the DNA test, everything would be legal." Ethan stared at her, the pieces starting to fall into place like jagged puzzle corners slicing through the narrative. "This wasn't your plan," he said. "It was his." She nodded slowly, then looked up, eyes watery, cracked wide open. "I just wanted him back," she said. "I would have done anything. You don't understand what it's like, to bury a child and wake up every day unsure if what you remember is real. And then someone tells you it might not be. That maybe, just maybe, you were right to hope." Her voice broke. "And if there's a 1% chance that child is your son, what kind of mother would you be if you didn't try?" Ethan didn't answer. Because buried beneath the irrationality, beneath the delusion and damage, was a brutal kind of logic only grief could understand. "Did he give you anything else?" Ethan asked after a moment. "Medication? Instructions?" She nodded again, slowly. "A small vial. Said it was just antihistamine. That it would help keep Charlie Emma calm during the flight. That it was safest, so she wouldn't panic being taken from strangers." "You gave her the whole vial?" "No," she said. "Just a few drops. That's what he said. That's what he promised." Ethan leaned back in his chair, pulse steady despite the sharp twist in his chest, because now it wasn't just abduction, it was conspiracy, manipulation, abuse of trust by a licensed professional. And that made it 10 times worse. He stood slowly, Thank you for telling me the truth." Isabel's voice came again softer. "She looked at me right before she passed out. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Just looked. Like she knew. Like she was waiting for me." Ethan paused at the door. "She wasn't waiting," he said gently. "She was surviving." Then he stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind him. Ranger looked up, rising as Ethan approached. "She didn't find that baby on her own," Ethan said, his voice flat. "Someone put her on a path, made it feel righteous." Ranger followed him down the hall, because now they weren't just chasing the shadow of grief. They were chasing the man who turned it into a weapon. The pediatric wing of St. Gabriel Medical Center was quieter than it should have been. Even at midnight, hospitals usually buzzed code calls, monitor beeps, the low shuffle of weary nurses moving through routines. But here, where the infant lay under protective observation, the air felt still. Too still. Ethan stood outside the room, arms crossed, eyes fixed through the glass at the tiny bundle inside. The child real name still unknown had been stabilized, hydrated, and was beginning to stir under the watchful eye of a nurse. A monitor beeped softly behind her. Normal, steady. Ranger sat beside Ethan, head on his paws, unmoving, until the elevator chimed. It was subtle, nothing urgent, just the soft ding of arriving company. Ranger lifted his head. A second passed. Then his ears went forward. Another second. Then his body shifted. Not tense. Coiled. Ethan turned, and there he was. Dr. Grayson Vale. Charcoal overcoat, silver-rimmed glasses, hospital badge clipped neatly to his lapel. His hair was perfectly combed, the kind of gray that came with age but not wear. His stride was calm, purposeful, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never had to. He offered a thin smile as he approached the nurse's station. "I'm here to check on a patient," he said to the young nurse behind the desk. "Dr. Grayson Vale. I received an urgent message about one of my outpatient clients being brought in. Isabel Monroe." The nurse tapped a few keys. "One moment, doctor." Ethan stepped forward. "Dr. Vale." Grayson turned toward the voice. His smile didn't waver. "Yes?" "I'm Officer Ethan Cole. This is Ranger." He didn't offer a handshake. Neither did Grayson. "I've already spoken with 2 detectives on the phone," Vale said. "They said it was a misunderstanding, but of course I wanted to see for myself. Isabel has been one of my more delicate cases. I was very concerned." Ethan nodded once. "And the child?" Grayson's smile dimmed just slightly. "I heard there was an infant involved. I don't have details, but if this child was involved in Isabel's confusion, I'd like to consult. She may have projected." "She didn't just project," Ethan replied. "She sedated that child, used a false identity, booked travel using credentials traced back to a client of yours." "Then I trust you'll do your job," Grayson said smoothly, "and I'll do mine." Ranger stepped forward. A low growl rumbled in his throat, low enough that it didn't raise alarms, but deep enough that it vibrated through the tiled floor. Grayson froze, just for a second, then looked down at the dog with a practiced kind of detachment. "You should have him evaluated. Dogs with behavioral trauma can often become unstable under pressure." Ethan didn't break eye contact. "He's reacting exactly as he's trained to." Ranger's body didn't move, but his ears were locked forward, tail stiff, not in fear, not even aggression. Recognition. And Ethan had seen that reaction before, once, years ago. When they'd walked into a storage unit, and Ranger knew before Ethan did that something dark waited behind the dry wall. "Where were you tonight around 6 p.m.?" Ethan asked calmly. Grayson raised a brow. "Is that an official question?" "It can be." "I was in session with a client until 5:40, he replied. "Then drove directly home. My wife and I were watching the news when we saw Isabel's name in the ticker. I came as soon as I could." "Would your wife confirm that?" "She would." Ranger's growl deepened, barely audible, but there. Controlled, focused, not barking, judging. Ethan knew the pattern well. It was Ranger's silent alarm. Not threat, not alert for explosives or contraband. It was the signal he used when someone wasn't what they claimed to be. "Do you know where Isabel got the ID she used?" Ethan asked. "She's a disturbed woman," Grayson said smoothly. "Her grip on reality is fragile. I can't account for everything she says or does. She says you helped her find the baby." Grayson didn't blink. "She's delusional," he said. "That's why she's under psychiatric care. If she told you I encouraged her to commit a felony, she's mistaken." "She told us you showed her a photo." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "I often use guided imagery in therapy. If she misinterpreted something—" "She also said you gave her medication." Now the doctor's expression faltered. Just a flicker. "I'm licensed to prescribe antihistamines," he said. "If she misused that, that's on her. She said you told her it was safe." "I said it was mild." Ranger's growl sharpened into a low, continuous hum. People nearby started to look. Ethan placed a calming hand on Ranger's flank. "He doesn't usually respond this way," he said, eyes still locked on Vale. "Not unless the bond between an adult and a child doesn't match, or unless someone's lying about how they feel." Grayson's jaw ticked. "I understand your concern," he said stiffly, "but you're relying on a traumatized dog's instincts. That's not evidence." "No," Ethan replied, "but sometimes instincts tell us what evidence takes too long to prove." Ranger didn't move, didn't growl louder, just held his ground. And Ethan, standing beside him, knew they were close, too close for comfort, and too close to turn back. Dr. Grayson Vale adjusted the badge clipped to his lapel like it was a crown, casual, confident, deliberate. The name was real. The credentials were real. But Ethan had been a cop long enough to know that just because a man wore a badge didn't mean he wore the truth. "I'd like to examine the child," Vale said, his voice smooth as silk, but too quick. "Just briefly. It would help me assess the extent of Isabel's regression, understand how she might have formed the delusion." Ethan didn't move. Neither did Ranger. "I appreciate the concern, Doctor," Ethan said, voice low. "But that won't be possible. The baby's under protective medical custody, no visitors, especially not civilians." Vale gave a soft, practiced laugh. "I'm not a civilian. I'm her doctor, her treating psychiatrist." "Then you're part of the problem." The smile on Vale's face flickered like something behind the mask twitched. "I'm trying to help," he said, calm but firm now. "Isabel is clearly unstable. Her psychosis may have fixated on this particular child, and I need to see the object of that fixation. Understanding the connection could be vital in her treatment." "Vital for her," Ethan said. "Not for the child." Vale took a step forward, and Ranger moved with him, smooth, silent, fluid blocking his path without needing a word from Ethan. The doctor stopped short. For a moment, it was just the three of them in the hallway, cop, dog, and a man who wore his calm like a disguise. "I'm sure we can agree," Vale said, voice tightening, "that the sooner Isabel stabilizes, the better for everyone involved." Ethan nodded slowly. "We do agree, which is why you're not getting anywhere near that child." Vale tilted his head. "You think I'm a threat?" Ranger growled, low, controlled, directly at his chest. Ethan didn't flinch. "He does. I think your dog needs a psych eval more than Isabel." That was when Ranger's growl deepened. Not louder, sharper, like a low-frequency warning few humans could truly hear. But every predator in the animal kingdom would understand. Ethan took a half-step forward. That's when he saw it, just the edge of it. When Vale shifted his coat, gesturing dismissively toward the nurse's station, the fabric lifted just enough to reveal a small cylindrical object tucked in the inside pocket of his blazer. Glass, silver cap, clear liquid. It was the kind of vial a field-trained eye wouldn't miss, especially one that had responded to overdoses, witnessed sedations, stood over gurneys where tiny lives hung in the balance. "Is that yours?" Ethan asked softly. Grayson blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "In your coat," Ethan said. "Left inside pocket. You're carrying a vial." Vale hesitated, then gave a smile too wide, too slow. "I carry anti-anxiety doses. A standard benzodiazepine compound I'm authorized to administer in emergencies. I treat panic patients. It's not unusual." "But it's unusual," Ethan replied, stepping closer, "to bring it into a pediatric wing and request to see a sedated child without clearance." Vale's smile thinned. "I sense some hostility, Officer Cole. You may want to examine whether that's coming from me or your own unresolved trauma." That one landed. Ethan didn't show it, but somewhere beneath the badge that word cut like rust. He kept his tone flat. "I'm examining exactly what I need to." Ranger stepped forward again, just inches from Vale now, nose lifted, tail low, body stiff, not in threat. In identification. He wasn't alerting to explosives, not drugs. He was reacting to something deeper, something off. Vale's hand twitched near his coat pocket like he was weighing whether to hide the vial better or pull it into view. But Ranger's low growl was now constant, steady. The hallway was still, tense. Then Ethan's radio crackled. "Unit 41, be advised subject's credentials confirmed. Dr. Vale is licensed, but he's under internal review by the state board. Several past patients filed complaints, boundary violations, allegations of undue influence." Ethan's eyes never left Vale's. "You forgot to mention that part." Vale didn't blink. "Unsubstantiated. Some patients lash out when confronted with truths they're not ready for." "Is that what happened with Isabel?" Ethan asked. "You showed her a baby photo, whispered just enough doubt, then gave her a script to follow?" Vale's smile faltered. "She was grieving. I offered hope." "No," Ethan said coldly. "You offered permission, and then you gave her the tools to act on it." For the first time, something passed through Vale's expression. Not guilt, not fear, control, slipping. He took another step back, and Ranger mirrored it, still blocking the door, still watching the pocket, still waiting for the lie to finish breathing. The interview room was warmer than most. That was intentional. Keep them comfortable. Let the skin loosen, the mouth follow. Interrogation wasn't always about pressure. Sometimes it was about softness, a slower suffocation. Dr. Grayson Vale sat with perfect posture, hands folded on the table in front of him like a man waiting for a lecture he already knew the ending to. His blazer was unwrinkled, his tie still straight. Not a single strand of hair out of place. A thin smile traced his lips as if to say, "I've been here before, and I'll be just fine." Across from him, Ethan watched. Silent. Still. A cup of coffee sat between them, untouched by either. Vale leaned back and offered a congenial shrug. "You seem tense, officer. I assume that means you're still waiting for the smoking gun." "Let's talk about the vial," Ethan said. Vale nodded. "Of course. Diazepam, fast-acting, legally prescribed and carried under my medical license, which, as I'm sure your records confirm, is current and active. For now." The doctor gave a soft chuckle. "Until the board decides if I'm a saint or a scapegoat? Yes, well, we live in difficult times. The line between help and harm has become increasingly blurred, especially when grief is involved. You told Isabel her baby might still be alive." "I offered a theoretical possibility," he replied smoothly. "Part of trauma integration therapy. We explore unresolved perceptions, hypotheticals. It's designed to help the patient confront their pain through guided imagination." "She sedated a child based on your guided imagination." "Allegedly," Vale corrected, that smile never faltering. "Until you confirm what was used and how much, we're still operating in a field of speculation." Ranger, seated behind the two-way glass, lifted his head. Not a sound, just stillness. Watching, like always. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Why target that child? Why Emma?" Grayson laced his fingers together. "I never gave Isabel a name. I simply helped her process her loss. If she misinterpreted my words, I deeply regret that." "You showed her a photo," Ethan said, "one that led her directly to that child." Vale's brow lifted in mock surprise. "I show hundreds of images during grief sessions. Infants, families, memory triggers. Isabel responded to many. I cannot be held responsible for which one lingered." Ethan didn't answer. Just let the air grow heavier. After a pause, Vale smiled again. "I'm writing a book, Officer Cole." "Is that what this is?" Ethan asked. "A research project?" "Maternal Echoes, Reconstructing the Narrative of Loss. That's the title. The publisher's very interested. It explores the neural imprint of child loss and the subconscious drive to recreate what was taken. It's controversial, certainly, but necessary." "You mean unethical?" Vale's voice dropped slightly. "I mean unflinching. Truth rarely comforts. It often confronts." Ethan let the silence answer for him. A knock came on the door. He turned. It was Detective Marla Chen, clipboard in hand, her face unreadable. She handed Ethan a file without a word. He flipped it open. Photographs, notes, inventory logs. The search of Vale's home had begun. Ethan looked up. "You kept a storage unit registered under a shell company." Vale's smile faded a fraction. "I have many files. Some require privacy." "We found photos of over 20 grieving women. Detailed psychological profiles. Sedative logs, communication records." The room grew quieter. "And a nursery," Ethan added. "Perfectly arranged. Untouched. Why?" Vale looked at him, eyes gleaming with something cold beneath the charm. "Have you ever lost a child, Officer Cole?" Ethan didn't blink. "I've carried one out of a house full of silence." "Is that close enough?" Vale's voice dropped into a lower register, intimate and razor-sharp. "Then you understand. Grief isn't just a wound, it's a map. It shows you where something used to be. And people like Isabel, they don't need closure. They need direction. I gave them that. I offered purpose to pain. You gave them permission to rewrite reality." "I gave them the dignity of choice," Vale said softly. "Something your justice system rarely does." Ethan stood now, his voice steady. "You manipulated a mentally unstable woman into kidnapping a child. If we find evidence that you gave her sedatives, or if your prints are on that child's birth documents, this won't be deflection anymore. It'll be conspiracy." Vale leaned back in his chair, that smile returning, thinner now. "If that's what you believe," he said, "then you haven't read the whole story." Ethan opened the door. "We're reading it now, chapter by chapter." Ranger stood as Ethan stepped out of the room, and behind the glass, Grayson Vale sat alone, unbothered, unrepentant, and very much unfinished. The lock gave way with a metallic snap, not loud, but final, like a door closing on something that had waited too long to be found. The air inside the storage unit was unnaturally still, the kind of quiet that didn't just come from insulation, but from intention. There was no musty scent of cardboard or mildew, no sign of decay. Instead, it smelled faintly of talcum powder and lavender. Ethan stepped inside first, flashlight in hand, with Ranger shadowing his movement. Behind them, Detective Marla Chen and 2 agents from Missing Persons followed closely, gloves on, expressions taut. The beam of light swept the walls and froze. On the left, rows of meticulously stacked file boxes, each one labeled by year and initials. Neat handwriting, clinical, cold. Next to them, pinned across a corkboard that spanned nearly half the wall, photographs of women, dozens of them. Some candid, others clearly taken without permission. In parks, outside funeral homes, leaving hospitals. Each face carried the same ache, a kind of broken resolve, the stunned hollowness of someone who had just buried part of their soul and hadn't yet realized the world kept turning. Beneath each photo was a note. Mother of stillborn, receptive to redirection. SIDS, disassociated affect, avoidant but ideal candidate. Lost child at 7 months, deep imprinting, unresolved grief. Marla whispered, "This is profiling, not therapy. He was collecting them." Ethan didn't respond. His jaw clenched. He moved deeper into the unit, stepping past a locked cabinet marked Materials, Sedatives, his light catching the corner of a framed picture lying face down on a small desk. He flipped it over. It was a woman holding a newborn Isabel. Only it wasn't her child. The timestamp on the back proved it. Ethan's voice was low, rough. "This was staged." Ranger growled a low, warning sound. Ethan turned the corner and stopped. The back half of the unit had been converted into a fully functional nursery. Crib, changing table, rocking chair, diaper bags stacked neatly in a row, folded onesies in drawers, baby powder, formula, everything untouched, everything immaculate, like a shrine, or a stage set waiting for the lead actor who never showed up. The walls were painted a soft sky blue with hand-painted clouds. A mobile spun silently over the crib, its plush animals suspended mid-motion, frozen in a lullaby never played. Marla stepped beside Ethan and covered her mouth. This wasn't about grief anymore. This was obsession. Ethan walked to the bookshelf, pulled a binder marked Emma 3B. Inside, birth records, sleep training schedules, vaccination logs, all forged, all meticulously fabricated. There was a schedule of first milestones handwritten on yellow notepaper. First smile, March 8th. First tooth, April 22nd. First word, Mama, TBD. And in the back pocket, a single ultrasound photo. Not real. A composite image printed from a stock database. Jesus Christ, one of the officers murmured. He built her a life. Ethan didn't speak. He stared at the mobile, still slowly spinning. He remembered what Vale said. I gave them the dignity of choice. But this wasn't dignity. This was scripted madness, a play written for mothers, too shattered to read the fine print. And he wasn't just handing out false hope. He was assigning roles. Suddenly, Ranger moved, quick, sharp. He pawed at the edge of the rocking chair, and beneath it they found a black notebook. Inside, case numbers, names, dates, even hospital security badge photos. One name was underlined twice. L. Thomason, Pediatric Discharge Coordinator, high risk, minimal oversight. That's the access point, Ethan said. He used her to target Emma. Maybe more. Marla turned toward the exit. We need warrants. Multiple. Ethan stood a moment longer, the weight of the silence pressing down. He looked around at the nursery, at the soft blanket in the crib still bearing the tag. Never washed, never used, waiting, but not for a child, for a story that never belonged to them. And Ranger, now lying near the door, let out a soft whine as if even he could feel it, the ghost of a life stolen twice. The air inside the storage unit shifted. It was almost imperceptible, just a stillness that didn't belong, a kind of waiting silence that hovered just after the last drawer was searched, as if something still watched from the shadows. Ranger stopped at the far corner of the nursery wall, nose inches from the drywall. His ears perked forward, tail rigid. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stood there, alert and absolutely still. Ethan noticed immediately. What is it, boy? Ranger didn't move. Ethan stepped closer, tapped lightly on the wall with his knuckles. Hollow, too hollow. He pulled out his multi-tool. Marla raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Ethan carefully wedged the edge into the seam of the corner panel. With a gentle pry, the drywall creaked, then gave way with a soft snap. Behind it was a false compartment, about the size of a microwave, lined with soundproof foam and wrapped in mylar. Inside, tightly stacked in vacuum-sealed sleeves, were a dozen USB drives, each marked with a single number and timestamp. No labels, no names. "What the hell?" Marla whispered, reaching for an evidence bag. Ethan's gut twisted. Ranger let out a low growl, not threatening but troubled, as if he already knew what those drives contained. Back at the station, hours later, the room was dark, except for the flickering glow of a monitor. Ethan sat alone, arms crossed, jaw tight. Ranger lay curled at his feet like a sentinel, silent and unmoving. Marla entered quietly, a folder clutched tight to her chest. "We decrypted the first 3. Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. The footage began, time-stamped, static hiss. Then Dr. Grayson Vale, seated in his office, dimly lit, warmly furnished, framed degrees on the wall. Across from him, a woman, trembling hands twisting a tissue in her lap. Her voice was distant, fragmented. I keep hearing her. My baby. I know she's gone, but sometimes at night, I swear—" Vale interrupted softly. "She's not gone. She's with you. You're just not listening the right way yet." The woman blinked, confused, hopeful, and that was the first hook. The next clip, a different woman, same office, same tone. Vale leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "They'll tell you you're delusional, that your grief makes you unfit. But I see something different. I see a mother, whose bond is too strong for death to sever." Pause. Her tears. "Would you like to see her again?" Marla fast-forwarded. Clip after clip. Each one followed the same pattern. Despair, suggestion, reinforcement. And then, fabrication. Vale would present manipulated ultrasound images, falsified soul mapping charts, even heartbeat resonance scans that he claimed could prove the child was still near. Ethan's fists clenched. He didn't comfort them, he recruited them. Marla nodded grimly. He didn't need them sane. He needed them desperate. One clip hit harder than the others. Isabel. She looked thinner than now, haunted. Vale spoke to her like a priest, not a therapist. "Isabel, this isn't about hallucinations. This is about unlocking a truth most people are too afraid to face." She looked up. "You mean he's still—" Vale nodded slowly. "He's waiting for you. But we have to prepare a vessel, a safe place, a setting he'll recognize." Isabel swallowed. "What do I need to do?" His voice dropped. "Everything I tell you. Exactly. No deviation." The screen faded to black. Ethan exhaled sharply and shut his eyes for a moment. Behind him, Ranger let out a low, almost human sigh. This wasn't therapy. This wasn't misguided hope. This was indoctrination, systematic, methodical, and deeply premeditated. Vale hadn't preyed on delusions. He manufactured them. "What about the other women?" Ethan asked. Marla opened the folder. "At least 4 of them have vanished since their last session. Families assumed suicide or psychiatric holds, but nothing confirmed. One of them, her name's Marcy Talbot. You might remember her daughter drowned last winter. Body never recovered." Ethan remembered the case. Remembered Ranger refusing to move near the lake shore for hours after they called off the search. He'd sat there, ears high, waiting, like he was expecting someone to come back who never did. "Was Vale her therapist?" he asked. Marla nodded. "I want that case reopened." She hesitated. "Ethan, this is bigger than we thought. If we push too fast, he could go underground." "He already was underground," Ethan replied. "We just ripped off the drywall." He glanced down at Ranger. The dog's eyes met his without blinking, calm, watchful, knowing. Ethan turned back to the monitor. Pressed play on the next file. They weren't done. Not yet. Because somewhere, behind polished words and synthetic empathy, a predator had built a doctrine of grief. And Ethan was going to dismantle it, piece by piece. The lamp buzzed faintly in the evidence room, casting a dim halo across the cluttered metal table where Ethan sat, hunched forward, flipping page after page with a tension that curled his fingers into the paper. Beside him, Marla stood silent, arms crossed, expression tight. They had both seen horrors. But there was something about this cold, calculated madness in black ink that hollowed the room of oxygen. Ethan turned the next page. At the top, centered and underlined in surgical precision, Maternal Reclamation Protocol, Draft 6.1, Dr. Grayson Vale, Lead Behavioral Architect. He read it twice, hoping it would mean something different the second time. It didn't. Beneath the title was a line of subtext that felt like a scalpel. Where grief creates voids, belief builds bridges. The first section was labeled Phase 1, Identification. It listed criteria like a recruiter selecting soldiers, recent maternal loss within 12 to 18 months, history of dissociative coping or unresolved trauma, no strong partner family support, high susceptibility to guided narrative techniques. Each entry was followed by psychological indicators, even preferred sedative types for emotional regulation during transition. Ethan felt bile rise in his throat. Ranger, resting near the door, lifted his head and let out a low, near-silent growl. He hadn't barked in hours, but his body remained coiled, tense, as if he could feel the wrongness soaking through the room. Ethan turned another page. Phase 2, Memory Interruption and Redirection. A chart followed, timelines for when to introduce alternate memory scaffolds, including recovered sonograms, falsified scent, memory cues, baby powder, recorded cooing, repurposed pacifiers, or infant clothing. Mirror therapy, reinforcing the presence of the child using strategically placed infant dolls or live children. But it was the next page that stopped him. It was a flowchart. At the center, target acquisition, live infant reclamation. With arrows branching outward, niece left in daycare unmonitored, possible extraction window, 20 mins. Neighbor child resembles subject's deceased infant. Introduce familiarity through dream-seeding conversations. Child with no extended family awareness. Foster shelters. Proceed with identity reassignment protocol. Marla spoke for the first time. Her voice was a rasp. He was training them, not just lying to them, training them to steal. Ethan nodded. And to believe it was love. He opened another folder, a file marked Case Nub0 Wemben Sin, Monroe, Isabel. He scanned the notes. Subject responded favorably to fetal resonance imaging, falsified. Deep grief response anchored in post-SIDS trauma. High compliance when paired with auditory affirmations. He knows your voice, he's just asleep. Reclamation target, unnamed male, estimated age 9 to 12 months. Local daycare data breached. Stage 3, projection, imminent. The baby. The child she carried through the terminal like porcelain. Not hers, never hers. But in her mind, a resurrection. Ethan closed the folder. His hands shook slightly. Across the table, another binder lay half open, pages warped as if from tears. He leaned forward and carefully pulled it toward him. Inside, Polaroids, crayon drawings, napkin notes with phrases like, "I'm coming soon, Mommy," scribbled in 2 sets of handwriting, one adult, one mimicked child. Each one labeled, logged, each one weaponized. "This isn't just about Isabel," Marla said quietly. "He's grooming entire narratives, building alternate realities for each of them, not to help, not even to exploit grief for profit." She turned a page. There, typed neatly at the top of the next section. Phase 4. Sustained reinforcement through repetition and isolation. Followed by a chilling note. If subject fails to maintain belief, escalate to pharmacological reinforcement. See Appendix C, microdosing schedule with compliance indicators. Ethan stared at the text. He didn't want them better. He wanted them compliant. Marla's voice lowered. And he wanted their children. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Ethan looked up. "How many women were in this program?" Marla swallowed. "At least 25, maybe more." We're cross-referencing the psychological reports from the storage unit with missing persons and uninvestigated infant abductions across 4 states. And the babies? He asked, though he didn't want the answer. 7 are unaccounted for. Ethan sat back in the chair. He looked at the walls lined with files, maps, red string tracking psychotic breaks like some macabre constellation. But this wasn't psychosis. This was design. This isn't a therapist gone rogue, he said. It's a doctrine, a belief system rooted in pain, structured like science, but it's cult behavior. Ranger let out a short, sharp huff. Not quite a bark, more like punctuation. Marla stared at the drive list. What kind of man teaches mothers to lie to themselves, then rewards them for the fantasy? Ethan didn't answer, because it wasn't just about the mothers. It was about ownership, about men like Vale who believed grief could be managed if they controlled the script. But there was one thing Vale hadn't accounted for. Instinct. The unteachable kind. The kind that lived behind a German shepherd's eyes. The kind that couldn't be hypnotized by stories or undone by lies. Ethan looked down at Ranger. "Let's go," he said. Ranger stood immediately, ready, silent, because they weren't done yet. The script wasn't finished. And Ethan wasn't interested in rewriting it. He was going to burn it down. The folder wasn't marked urgent. It didn't scream for attention. But something about the way it sat slightly off-center, edges creased as if thumbed through more often than the others, caught Ethan's eye. He pulled it slowly toward him. The tab read, Voss, Elena, 36, Lexington, M.A. Reclamation attempt scheduled March 18th. Handoff window 9:10 a.m. Brighton Montessori parking lot. Ethan's blood ran cold. Today was March 15th. 3 days. 3 days until another baby vanished into someone else's grief. He flipped open the folder. The first page was a photo. A woman with ash-blonde hair and hollow eyes. She was seated in what looked like a therapy office, clutching a stuffed giraffe against her chest. Her gaze didn't meet the camera. Her mouth was parted, like she was mid-sentence or mid-memory. Under the photo was a note scribbled in Vale's looping handwriting. Primary delusion accepted. Sarah is alive and waiting. Trust level high, compliance excellent, no known local support system. Infant target resembles deceased daughter, see photo C. Initiate phase 4 with minimal sedation. Ethan swore under his breath. Next was the child's information. Name, Madeline Ross. Age, 10 months. Daycare, Brighton Montessori. Mother, Danica Ross, 27, single parent, works full-time. The photo showed a wide-eyed little girl in a red raincoat, arms outstretched as if reaching for the camera. "She has no idea," Ethan whispered. Ranger shifted beside him, ears alert. The room had gone still. Across the table, Marla watched him. "Another target?" He nodded. "Elena Voss. She's next. 3 days from now." Vale already outlined the handoff location. He knew the routine, the time Danica drops her daughter off. He was going to have Elena take the baby. She believes it's her daughter come back to life. Marla's jaw tightened. "She's one of the women on the USB footage?" "Yeah. Highly responsive to conditioning. The notes say she's already practiced saying, 'Hi, honey, it's Mommy,' into mirrors while holding a stand-in doll." A pause. "She thinks this is a reunion." Marla rubbed her temples. "If we get to Danica, we can reroute the drop-off, maybe lure them out." "No," Ethan said sharply. "We can't use her baby as bait. We have to get to Elena first, before she reaches that parking lot." He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back. The screech of the metal legs echoed like urgency. Marla followed. "Do we know where Voss is now?" Ethan grabbed the folder and opened the last page. Address: 14 Langford Ave, Lexington. Therapy notes suggest minimal outings, mostly homebound. He nodded. "We go now." Ranger was already on his feet, tail rigid, gaze locked on the door. Lexington, Massachusetts, 14 Langford Avenue. It was a small house, white shutters, a porch swing that hadn't been used in months. Overgrown ivy clung to the railing like fingers reluctant to let go. Ethan stepped out of the cruiser and scanned the windows. Closed, curtains drawn, no signs of life. But Ranger's body told a different story. He pulled forward, nostrils flaring, low growl humming from his chest. "She's in there," Ethan muttered. Marla approached slowly. "You want me to knock?" "No, I want to talk." He stepped forward and called gently, "Elena?" No movement. "Elena Voss, my name is Ethan Cole. I'm with law enforcement, and I know about Dr. Vale." That made something shift. A shadow passed behind the curtain, barely perceptible. "I know he told you Sarah was waiting," Ethan continued, voice low, steady. "And I know how much that hurt to believe, but I need you to hear me now. He lied." Silence. Then a creak. The door cracked open 2 inches. A single pale eye peered through. "She's not dead," Elena whispered. Her voice was thin, raw, the sound of a person running out of ways to hold themselves together. "She is," Ethan said softly. "But the love you had for her that's still real. It always will be, and I promise you that matters. But if you take someone else's child, Elena, you're not bringing Sarah back. You're creating another mother who'll grieve the way you do now." Tears welled in the woman's eye. "I was going to hold her," she said, shaking. "Just for a moment. He said I'd know it was her by the warmth." Behind her, on a side table, Ethan could make out a tiny pink blanket folded and ready. "Elena," he said gently, "look down." She did. Ranger sat quietly just beyond the threshold, unmoving, but focused. His gaze locked to hers, not threatening, just present, solid, a mirror for the ache she carried. "He was there too," Ethan added. "He lost someone once, a baby. He didn't bark for weeks after, just waited, just like you." She dropped to her knees, not out of surrender, but from the exhaustion of carrying a ghost too long. The door opened. Back at the cruiser, Ethan watched through the rearview mirror as EMTs helped Elena into the vehicle, wrapped in a soft blanket, hands folded as if praying. She didn't fight, didn't scream, just turned to Ranger and said, barely audible, "Thank you for not barking." And Ranger, in that deep, almost imperceptible way only a few ever noticed, gave one small, slow wag of his tail, as if to say, "She heard me." And for now, that was enough. The corridors of the West Bridge Psychiatric Institute still smelled like disinfectant and winter. Faint hints of coffee and old paper drifted beneath the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, but none of it masked the sense of something unspoken, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ethan walked slowly, Ranger at his side, drawing glances from staff who hadn't seen a K-9 unit here in years. The reception nurse didn't ask questions. She just pointed toward the staff lounge. Inside, 3 people sat clustered around a table littered with half-eaten pastries, a security badge, a clipboard, a thermos. Casual, normal. Until Ethan said one name. Dr. Grayson Vale. The silence was immediate and heavy. One of them, a middle-aged nurse with streaks of gray in her bun, set her coffee down too fast. It clinked against the table, then rolled slightly. No one stopped it. Ethan glanced around. "None of you suspected anything?" A man in blue scrubs shifted uneasily. "You're asking if we thought the guy giving free grief counseling and staying late with trauma patients was secretly building a cult of delusion?" "No. No, we didn't." The older nurse finally spoke. "Grayson was quiet, but in a kind way. The type that knew when not to speak. Families liked him. Some of our toughest cases, mothers with profound trauma, he could get them to open up like nothing." Ethan nodded slowly. "Too easily." She exhaled, her voice dropping. "There were whispers. Nothing solid. Just little moments that felt off. One time he gave a patient a photo album. Said it was hers, but it had pictures we'd never seen in her file. She cried for days, thinking her daughter had sent it. Turned out it was stock photography. That hit Ethan like a punch. Did you report it?" "We told administration. They said he was offering comfort. Creative therapy, they called it." Ranger let out a low growl. Not hostile, not loud, just knowing. Ethan turned to him, then back to the staff. "Anyone else see or hear something odd?" Another nurse shook her head, but the older one hesitated. "There was one time," she said softly. "We were on break. He was reading an article about a custody case, family court stuff. Said something strange. I remember it because it didn't sound like him." Ethan leaned in. "What did he say?" She closed her eyes, recalling. "The system destroys natural families and calls it order. If people knew what was taken from them, they'd reclaim it by any means necessary." The room fell into silence again. Ethan stood up. "Did you tell anyone?" She looked ashamed. "We thought he meant biological fathers losing visitation rights. You hear that kind of talk in psych sometimes. People venting about bureaucracy." "But he wasn't venting," Ethan said coldly. "He was rationalizing." He paused, then opened his notebook. "Do you have any idea how many patients he worked with directly?" The nurse nodded, already reaching for a locked drawer behind her. "He kept his own logs, but we're required to track cross-case involvement." She slid a binder across the table. Inside, names. Dozens, maybe more. Dates, diagnoses, family trauma notations, and next to some tiny initials, GV. Ranger shifted closer, tail low, ears forward. Ethan marked several names. "These match victims from the storage unit, but there are others we haven't even traced yet." He looked up at the group. "I need you to go through every one of these files, and I need you to ask yourselves not who cried, but who suddenly stopped crying, who accepted too quickly, who smiled again in a way that didn't make sense." The older nurse clutched her lanyard. "You think he turned them into what? Actors? Believers?" "I think," Ethan said quietly, "he offered them a story where their pain had a second act, and some of them were so lost, they took it." A young aide whispered, "Like playing God." Ethan didn't answer, because that was exactly what it was. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the glass. Ranger pawed at the passenger door but didn't jump in. Instead, he looked out toward the fence line, past the building, past the parking lot, staring into a place Ethan couldn't see. It wasn't alert. It was memory. Ethan rested a hand on Ranger's neck. "You smell it, don't you?" The dog didn't move. Ethan lowered his voice. "The ones who never got to leave." Later that night, back at the motel, Ethan spread the papers across the bed like puzzle pieces. Photos of grieving mothers, deleted medical reports, audio notes labeled post-acceptance conditioning, and then a patient name not on any official logbook, handwritten in the margin of an intake form. N. Callahan, age 38. Status: sensitive, watch for brake pattern. Do not accelerate memory reimposition. A sticky note attached in Vale's handwriting. May prove too aware. If she resists, divert plan. Ethan stared at it. His eyes narrowed. His heart sank. Because he knew that name. Not from the files, not from Ranger's alerts, but from a voicemail he'd received 4 days earlier. A woman's voice, breathy, fractured, terrified. "I think someone's trying to convince me my daughter is still alive. But I buried her. I held her. I have the death certificate. Please, if you get this. I need someone who understands what's real." Ethan had saved the voicemail. He'd meant to call her back. He hadn't. Ranger nudged his leg. Ethan looked down. No bark, just a stare. And that was enough. Because sometimes, when humans forgot the weight of what was missing, dogs remembered. The motel room was quiet except for the soft creak of old heating coils and the occasional low rustle of Ranger adjusting his position by the door. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by paper trails case files, psychological notes, interview transcripts. It was like staring at a constellation made of trauma. And somewhere at the center of it was a man who should have never been trusted with fragile minds. He kept coming back to the name on the corner of that patient report. N. Callahan. Not just because of the voicemail, but because something about the handwriting felt rushed, like Vale was afraid, or like someone was watching him for once. Ethan rubbed his temples. "There's something we're still missing, Ranger." The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't move. He was listening, the way only dogs trained for trauma do, head low, chest breathing slow, waiting for the moment. The human puzzle clicked. Ethan opened his laptop and began searching through any trace of Grayson Vale's personal history licenses, teaching stints, certifications. One folder stood out. Family Court Appeals, 2011. He clicked. And there it was. Grayson Vale v. State of Washington. Petition, reinstatement of parental rights. Child, Micah Vale, age 4 at time of filing. Result, denied. Reason, allegations of psychological manipulation, delusional ideation, and refusal to comply with mandated therapy. Ethan leaned forward. He had a son. He scrolled deeper through pages of court notes, testimonies from child welfare officers, and psychological evaluations of both Vale and his ex-partner. The narrative was sickeningly familiar. Grayson was accused of planting false memories in the child, of whispering that his mother wasn't real, that she was an imposter. Parental alienation taken to clinical levels, the court-appointed psychologist wrote. The court took Micah away. Custody was awarded entirely to the mother. No visitation, no calls. 2 months later, the boy disappeared. Case closed due to presumed abduction. Suspect, unknown. Child never recovered. Ethan sat back, heart sinking. Vale didn't just invent the maternal reclamation protocol. He lived it. He had been the prototype, a failed father who believed the state had kidnapped his child, not physically, but ideologically. He didn't lose his son in his eyes. He believed the world stole him. Everything he did, Ethan murmured, wasn't just cruelty or corruption. Ranger let out a low, questioning whine. It was revenge, not against individuals, against a system. Ethan opened another document, this time a private note scanned from Vale's home computer. They took Micah and told me he needed protection from me, but I am the only one who ever saw him completely. I know what makes a parent. Not paperwork, not permission. There are others who've been erased like me. They just don't remember yet. I help them remember. I return what was stolen. Ethan clenched his jaw. This wasn't about Isabel, or even Elena Voss, whose name was still circled on the dry erase board back at the precinct. They were vessels, volunteers drafted into a war they didn't know existed. Vale had made himself a soldier, or worse, a prophet, and each reclamation was both sermon and sacrament. Outside the motel, the wind howled. A storm was rolling in. Ethan stood, paced. His hand brushed the pocket that held the folded voicemail transcript from N. Callahan. I need to find her. Tonight. Ranger rose without command, not because he understood the name, but because he recognized the urgency in Ethan's voice. Back at the precinct, Ethan combed through the digital logs from the storage unit search again. He scanned the metadata from one of the USB drives found inside the false wall. One folder, Custody Recon V3. Inside, audio recordings, therapy sessions, and then a clip labeled simply, Reenactment, Micah. Ethan clicked play. Do you remember what your mom told you about me? A pause. A small boy's voice, tinny and distant, hesitant. She said you weren't safe. Vale's voice, soft but charged. But did I ever hurt you, Micah? Another pause. No. That's right. Because real daddies don't hurt their sons. Real daddies protect. One day you'll see. She's the one who lied. She made you forget me. But I'll help you remember. The audio ended. Ethan froze. He'd heard grooming before, psychological warfare. But this wasn't just manipulation. This was reconstruction, taking a child's identity apart and rebuilding it into a version that served one man's grief. Ranger pressed against Ethan's knee. The agent swallowed hard. He didn't just lose Micah. He made Micah into a ghost. And now, he was using that ghost to justify stealing other people's children. Ethan clicked open a database of missing kids. He searched for Micah Vale, narrowed the dates, filtered by region. Only one match appeared, but the file was marked closed, presumed deceased. No body ever recovered, only a shoe, found near a ferry terminal. Blood-stained. It was never proven to be Micah's. Ethan whispered, You never found him, did you? Ranger let out a small huff, because the past wasn't just prologue now, it was blueprint. And unless they found Elena Voss before next week, another woman would fall into the same trance of grief and illusion. And another child, possibly already chosen, would vanish into Vale's perfect story, unless someone burned that story down. The rain had come early needle-fine and cold, tapping against the unmarked van as it climbed a lonely gravel road, flanked by towering firs. Oregon was always quiet this time of year, as if the forest itself had learned how to hold its breath. Inside the van, Ethan sat rigid, eyes locked on a topographic map under a single red tactical light. His finger hovered over a penciled X in the middle of nowhere coordinates hidden in the metadata of a photo file. A child's drawing, a log cabin with a red door. In one corner, scrawled in crayon, E.J. Ranger, the German shepherd at his side, was unusually still, ears pricked at every change in terrain. He wasn't just alert, he was waiting. A voice crackled over comms. 2 minutes out. No heat signatures. Cabin looks occupied, shutters closed, chimney cold. Silent entry, Ethan said. No flash. Clean. The van stopped. The team fanned out into the wet, whispering woods. Ranger melted into the shadows, paws silent on moss and pine needles. The cabin appeared. A red door faded to rust, shutters crooked in the wind. Ethan's heart pounded louder than his boots as they entered. Inside, the air was stale with the smell of damp wood and forgotten lives. Toys stacked in a bin, 2 cereal bowls on the table, milk turned sour. Then a soft shuffle. A boy stood in the hallway. Thin, maybe 10, faded red hoodie, hair unkempt, eyes sunken but wide. He looked up. "Who are you?" And Ethan's breath hitched. It was him. Older, changed, but unmistakable. Ethan Jr. Next to him, a woman held a storybook, her smile fixed, eyes blank. "He's mine," she said. "He's Micah." Ranger stepped forward. Growl low, not hostile, but warning. "Elena," Ethan said gently. "My name's Ethan. I'm not here to hurt you." "You're one of the doctors." "I'm not. He told me you'd come." The man with the soft voice. Ethan's throat tightened. "That boy's name isn't Micah. It's Ethan." "Ethan Jr., he's my son." The boy turned to her. "Mom." Her grip faltered. "Micah, say something, baby." But he stepped away, to Ranger, who sat down, still, as if to say, "Safe here." Outside, the rain whispered on the roof. In a side room, Ethan found another child and another lie. A woman blonde, calm, too calm, said, "I'm just the nanny, hired by Dr. Mitchell." "ID?" Ethan asked. "Left it in the car." Of course she had. The boy beside her clutched a stuffed elephant, eyes too practiced for his years. "What's your name?" Ethan asked softly. "Micah," he said. Then after a beat, "Sometimes Daddy calls me Andrew." "Why?" "In case the bad people are looking, it's for safety." "And who's your daddy?" The boy's voice dropped. "Dr. Mitchell." Ethan's gut twisted. This wasn't just a missing child. This was a stolen identity. Later, Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, voice lowered, authority set aside. Across from him, the boy. His son rested a hand on Ranger's shoulder, as if learning what safety felt like. "Do you remember what your name was before Micah?" The boy hesitated, scanning the room like danger might be hiding. "I told you. Sometimes Daddy calls me Andrew." "There's another name, the one you were born with." Ethan held out a laminated photo, a toddler clutching a blue dinosaur plush, a father's hand on his shoulder. The boy stared at it. "I don't know him." "You were very young when you were taken. But that's you. Before the hiding, before the new names." The boy tensed. "Don't say that name," he whispered. "Which name?" "Ethan. That's what the bad man called me when he was angry." Ethan's heart broke. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. The boy hugged Ranger closer. He said being Ethan was dangerous, that people would try to take me away. They didn't try. They did. The boy glanced at the photo again, voice barely audible. Are you a dad? I was supposed to be. Silence. Then, my mom used to sing. I remember a soft voice, but not her face. Memories like that are real, even when they hide. The boy's hand curled around the photo. My name is Ethan. Ethan felt the dam of grief crack. I've waited so long to hear that. The boy frowned. Why? Because you're my son. The boy stared. You're not him. No. And I will never hurt you. A pause. Can I still be Micah? For a little while? Ethan smiled. Of course. Ranger wagged his tail once. Outside, the rain eased. And for the first time in years, Ethan Jr. Micah sat between truth and the story he'd been forced to live, and chose a piece of both. The address was buried deep in court records no one wanted to revisit, in social work files half erased by bureaucracy, hidden between a restraining order and a no-known forwarding address. But Ethan knew justice doesn't live on the surface. Sometimes you have to dig. The duplex in Eugene, Oregon, sagged under the weight of time and silence. Vines clung to the fence like they'd forgotten how to let go. A plastic tricycle lay on its side, swallowed by weeds. Ethan didn't wear a badge today, just a gray windbreaker and the weight of too many questions. Ranger stepped out first, scanned the yard, then sat by the gate patient, poised. The door opened before Ethan could knock. Christina Vale, faded cardigan, hair streaked with silver, eyes sunken but alert. Yes? Her voice wasn't wary, just tired, the kind of tired no sleep could fix. Ethan said her name like it mattered. I need to talk to you about your son. No flinch, no anger. Just air caught in her throat, a breath that never made it out. She opened the door wider. The house was sparse, clean, every book dog-eared, every plant reaching too far for light. Please, she said, already bracing. Don't tell me this is about what they said I did. I've survived enough hearings. Ethan shook his head. Not about what they said, about what they took. She sank into the couch like her bones remembered every court bench, every hospital bed. I lost custody because of Grayson, she said. He convinced the court I was unstable. Postpartum psychosis, they said. I never even testified. Just one psych eval, his friend wrote it. You were never declared dangerous, Ethan said quietly. Just unsuitable for sole custody. Your appeals disappeared before anyone read them. Her hands trembled. I told them he was controlling, but he charmed them. Letters from colleagues. Expert in grief. He even wrote a paper about me. When the mother breaks. Christina, Ethan said gently. He didn't just take custody. He built a machine, reprogramming mothers, making them believe strangers' children were theirs, calling it therapy. No, she whispered. He stole more than you. He stole lives. Your son is one of them. Her eyes filled, the dam of grief cracking. He's alive? Ethan nodded. 5 years old, healthy, but he doesn't know who he is. They told him you were dead, that Grayson saved him. A sob broke free, muffled by her hands. I dreamed of him, she said. A cabin, shadows. I thought it was grief, not truth. It was both. Her voice steadied. Can I see him when he's ready?" Ethan nodded. He knows his real name, and he knows the man who raised him wasn't his father. Did he ask about me? Ethan hesitated, then said, "He asked if he could keep being Micah for a while. But when I said Ethan, he didn't flinch." Tears spilled down her face. "All these years they said I imagined it, that mothers like me exaggerate trauma." She met his gaze, fierce now. "Don't let them take him again." "I won't." And for a moment, two strangers sat united by loss, by a boy who would soon have to choose between the name he was given and the one he survived under. Before Ethan left, she touched Ranger's head. "He always knew, didn't he?" Ethan nodded. "He always knows." The waiting room at the Advocacy Center smelled of lavender and worn paper hope, not fear. Christina sat on the edge of a blue couch, hands clenched, breath held. Through frosted glass, a counselor said, "He's finishing snack time." In the hallway, Ethan and Ranger waited. The shepherd's tail thumped once. Not excitement, readiness. Then came the boy. Small feet, quiet steps. Red hoodie too big, sleeves over his hands. Christina rose without thinking. He stopped. 5 years of missed birthdays, of whispered I love yous into the dark. Now here he was. And he didn't run, didn't speak, just looked, like she was a dream he didn't dare wake up. Ranger moved first, gently nudged the boy's back, a silent push. "Go." The boy took a step, then another, then ran into her arms. She collapsed to her knees, holding him like she'd never let go again. "I dreamed you had freckles," she whispered, kissing his temple. "And you do, right here." He studied her face like a map he'd been told didn't exist. "Are you?" She nodded, tears falling. "I'm your mama, always." Softly, he said, "Ranger said I'd be safe today." The room stilled. "You talk to Ranger?" "He doesn't use words, but I hear him when I close my eyes." No one doubted it. He asked, "Do I have to go back to Dr. Mitchell's?" Ethan knelt beside them. "No. You never have to see him again." The boy's shoulders eased for the first time. Christina cupped his cheeks. "He lied, baby. No one's taking you from me again." A counselor offered a quiet room. Christina lifted him without asking. Her son. Not a case. Not evidence. Her heartbeat. Ranger trailed them, his tail sweeping the floor once, then stilling. Ethan watched, hand on the glass. In that room, the boy slept against his mother's chest, anchored by her sleeve. Ranger rested beside them, eyes open but calm, guarding a promise no court could make. Outside, Ethan closed his eyes, letting the weight of it all wash over him. And in the hush of that long day's end, he knew. The badge didn't solve this. Truth did, love did. And a dog who had spent his life seeing what others missed. A dog who kept his promise. I'll protect what others forget to see. And tonight, in the quiet glow of fading light, Ranger kept that vow. The courtroom was too quiet for a case like this. Ethan had testified in federal buildings, rundown county courthouses, and everything in between. He'd seen tempers flare, families beg for mercy, tears flow like rivers. But this silence? It wasn't calm. It was contained, like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for something to crack. Grayson Vale sat at the defense table in a charcoal gray suit, hands folded, face composed. Too composed. like a man rehearsing a role he'd spent years perfecting. Insanity. That was the plea. "Your Honor," the defense attorney began, smooth as oil, "my client has a long-documented history of emotional trauma, psychotic breaks stemming from the loss of custody of his son." Ethan's jaw clenched. Across the aisle, Christina sat stiff-backed, knuckles white as she gripped her seat. Ethan Jr., now under protective guardianship, wasn't there. Safe in a secure home for the night, unaware of the storm his existence had unraveled. The prosecutor's voice cut in sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. The state will demonstrate calculated planning, manipulation, and criminal deception. This was no psychotic break. This was design." "Objection noted. Proceed with evidence," the judge said, gavel firm. The first clip played. Black and white surveillance footage, Vale pausing in a hospital hallway, coat concealing a vial of midazolam. Ranger standing still, blocking the path. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Next, forged medical letters, birth certificates with the ink of lies. Then the phrase that shifted the air. "Maternal reclamation protocol." The room erupted. "Order!" the judge commanded. But no gavel could erase what they'd just heard. The storage unit nursery. The USB drives hidden behind false walls. The vials matched to sedatives found in children's bloodstreams. And Vale, his jaw ticked. Just once. Not guilt, not fear, calculation. When court recessed, Christina approached Ethan. "You think they'll see it for what it was?" "They see it now," Ethan said. "They see the blueprint." She hesitated. "Do you think he ever loved his son?" Ethan stared at the defense table. He loved the idea of a son, not the boy, not the truth. Because men like Vale didn't want love. They wanted the illusion of it, controlled, unquestioning, something to own. And when reality refused, they tried to rewrite it. When Ranger entered the courtroom later, no leash, no muzzle, the room fell silent. He padded beside Ethan to the stand, steady as always. "Detective Cole," the prosecutor said, "describe Ranger's role." Ethan spoke low. "Ranger is trained for narcotics, threat assessment, child welfare identification. But what made this case different is harder to quantify. Ranger has what we call affective attunement. He reacts to emotional dissonance, especially around children. That's why he barked at Isabel, why he stood between Vale and the infant. He knew something didn't match." "The lie and the truth?" "Exactly." Objection. "Denied," the judge said. Footage rolled. Airport. Ranger barking, blocking Isabel. Hospital. Ranger standing like stone between Vale and the child's room. Training field. A decoy handler feigning warmth. Ranger sees through it. Stares down the fake caregiver until the drill ends. When the lights rose, no one doubted him. "Do you believe we'd be here today?" the prosecutor asked softly. "With a living child and 22 recovered identities, if Ranger hadn't intervened?" Ethan's voice cracked. "No." And that word filled the room. The jury didn't look away. Even the stenographer paused, as if the truth had stunned the keys into silence. Judge Marin returned to deliver the verdict. Grayson Vale sat rigid. Not handcuffed yet. "You exploited mental health vulnerabilities," the judge said. "Weaponized maternal grief, fabricated identities, facilitated child endangerment under the guise of therapy. You are hereby sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. No outcry, no applause, just the click of handcuffs. Final. As he was led past, Vale's voice broke the hush. "I only gave them back what was stolen." Ranger stood. No bark, no growl, just stood, as if to say, "We see you." And when the door shut behind Vale, the sound echoed through the chamber sharp final, enough to make Ethan Jr. flinch. The boy turned. His eyes met Ethan's across the aisle, and Ranger lay back down, but closer, because the deceiver had been sentenced. But healing? That was only just beginning. Weeks later. The courthouse yard was quiet, spring breeze whispering through fresh green leaves. Ethan, Christina, Ethan Jr., and Ranger stood together. The boy clutched a certificate. Name restoration granted. Ethan knelt. "You ready?" The boy nodded. "I'm Ethan." And this time he didn't whisper it like a secret. He said it like a promise. The applause was quiet at first, tentative, like the town didn't quite know how to honor something that had almost broken them. But then someone stood, a woman in the back row holding a child close, then a veteran in uniform, then the mayor. One by one the room rose to its feet, for a dog, for a man, for what they'd endured and refused to let define them. Ethan didn't move at first. He stood beside Ranger at the edge of the auditorium stage, hand resting just behind the dog's shoulder blades. Ranger's posture was upright, but his eyes kept scanning the crowd, not for threats, just for familiarity, as if he were still learning what peace looked like. The mayor stepped forward, voice thick with emotion. "Today, we honor Canine Ranger and Officer Ethan Cole for their unwavering service, their instincts that saved lives, and their refusal to look away when the system failed." A plaque was handed over. Cameras clicked. Children clutched stuffed animals in the front row. But Ranger didn't blink until he saw her. Christina Vale. She wasn't standing on the stage, but by the side entrance beside a sign that read, "Trauma Advocacy and Family Healing Center, now open." She'd chosen her path, not to run, not to retreat, but to speak. Christina now led support groups for survivors of grief manipulation, mothers who'd been told they were crazy for still hearing their child's voice in the night, women who'd once clung to lies because they hurt less than silence. She nodded at Ethan, a nod that said, "You did good. We all did." Later, after the speeches faded and the room began to empty, Ethan knelt beside Ranger in the grass outside the hall. The late autumn sun warmed the back of his neck. Ranger leaned into him slightly, the way he always did when the world felt full. Ethan held out a simple form, signed, stamped, official. "Don't think anyone ever asked you if you wanted to stay," Ethan murmured. "But I'm asking now." Ranger looked up. No wag, no bark, just understanding. Ethan smiled, then clipped a new tag onto Ranger's collar. Not government issued, not temporary. Just one word. Family. The morning light poured through the tall windows of the Advocacy Center, catching in motes of dust that hung like soft glitter in the air. The building had once been a courthouse annex, cold, echoing, utilitarian. Now it was filled with laughter. Paper drawings fluttered from walls like prayers. Crayon boxes sat open on every table. Tiny socks were left forgotten on a play rug in the reading room. And Ranger patrolled. He didn't bark, didn't pace. He simply moved where he was needed. A little girl with braids, maybe 5, sat in the corner clutching a plush turtle so tight its seams were starting to fray. Her mother was across the room in conversation with a counselor, voice hushed but firm. The girl hadn't said a word since arriving. No crying, no screaming, just the silence of someone who'd seen too much for someone so small. Ranger lay down beside her without prompting, not facing her, beside her parallel, as if to say, "I'm not here to watch. I'm here to stay." The girl's fingers crept toward him slowly, touched his ear, then stilled. A breath passed, then another. And then finally she leaned into his side like he was a wall she didn't have to be strong against. No command was given, no handler nearby, just instinct. Across the room, Ethan watched from a distance. He didn't interfere. He'd learned long ago that Ranger didn't need guiding here. This place was his beat now, not airports, not criminal chases, but healing, real work, harder work. In the hallway, Christina paused, arms folded gently as she looked through the glass. "He's become part of the structure, you know," she said, voice quiet. "The kids, they look for him first, not us." Ethan nodded. They trust what doesn't ask them to explain. She smiled faintly, eyes never leaving Ranger. He doesn't need to be told who's hurting. Later that day, a teenage boy, 16, tall, defensive in his posture, slouched into the building. He'd refused therapy, barely spoke to his caseworker. But when Ranger crossed his path, the boy stopped, looked down. Something flickered. He didn't reach out, didn't smile. But when he sat in the corner later, Ranger sat near the doorway, just within sight, just close enough. By nightfall, when the sun dipped behind the line of elm trees outside and the soft glow of string lights took over, Ranger lay by the fireplace near the front lobby, surrounded by the quiet hum of bedtime stories and closing folders. This was his patrol. No sirens, no orders, just hearts, one by one, still learning how to beat again. And Ranger, silent sentinel, walked each one home. The snow had started just before dusk, quiet, fine, and relentless. By nightfall, it blanketed the world in hush. Trees stood like statues outside the advocacy center, their limbs etched in white lace. In the courtyard beyond the fence, children played under the string lights, their boots carving joyful paths through the drifts. Laughter echoed across the yard, rising in puffs of warm breath against the cold. Inside, fire crackled gently in the hearth. The world smelled of cinnamon tea and wool blankets. Ethan sat in the armchair closest to the flames, a worn book resting closed in his lap. He wasn't reading, just listening. Ranger lay at his feet, chin on his paws, breathing slow and deep. His fur shimmered in the orange glow, flecked with faint silver, now a badge of time, not battle. The room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that feels complete. Ethan leaned down slowly, brushing his fingers through the thick fur behind Ranger's ear. The dog didn't stir, but his tail thumped once against the wooden floor, a soft sound, like a memory choosing to stay. "You did good, boy," Ethan whispered, voice barely above breath. "You gave more than they ever asked." Ranger's ear twitched. "You can rest now, partner." The words hung between them. No ceremony, no command, just truth. For a long time, nothing moved. The fire crackled. The children outside called to one another in the snow, their voices distant but alive. And within those walls, time slowed, cradling the weight of what had been and what would always be. Ranger let out one final sigh. Then his eyes, warm and dark, fluttered closed. No bark, no whimper, just peace. Ethan didn't cry, not yet. He reached down and let his hand rest on Ranger's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath, slow like a tide coming home. In the doorway, Christina watched silently, one hand to her mouth. Behind her, a girl with red mittens peeked in, saw the scene, and tiptoed away without a word, as if knowing some moments aren't meant to be broken. The firelight danced across the walls, and Ranger, ever the guardian, lay like he always had between the dark and the ones who needed light. His last patrol was done. But his story? It would stay in every child who dared to love again, in every adult who dared to believe healing could start with something as simple as a nudge from a silent dog's nose. Outside, the laughter continued, and inside, peace finally breathed. In a world often too fast, too loud, and too broken, the quiet loyalty of a dog like Ranger reminds us of what truly matters. His journey from trauma to trust, from guardian to companion, was never just about protecting others. It was about healing the unseen, believing in second chances, and showing that even the most shattered spirits can find their way home. German shepherds are more than working dogs. They are hearts with paws. Their intuition, courage, and unconditional love speak in silences we often overlook. Through Ranger's eyes, we saw not just danger, but hope. Not just fear, but the choice to stand between innocence and harm, again and again. This story is for those who've been lost and found, for every child who needed safety and every adult who dared to protect it, and for every soul, two-legged or four, who's ever chosen to stay when they could have walked away. May we honor their stories. May we protect those who can't speak for themselves. And may we always remember, sometimes the ones who save us walk on four legs and never ask for anything in return but a place to rest beside the fire.